I found out about my wife's affair at work and chose silence over chaos. Welcome to Michael Tells Stories. Here, I share daily infidelity stories about unfaithful wives. Thank you for listening. The morning I found out, it wasn't thunder or a shattered glass kind of moment. It was the soft click of a refrigerator door closing. The smell of yesterday's coffee turning faintly sour in the pot. And the way my wife's phone lit up on the kitchen counter like a tiny stage light that didn't care who was watching. I was rinsing a cereal bowl because our son, Noah, had started leaving little milky islands everywhere like he was mapping an ocean. And I remember thinking, absurdly, about how my father used to insist the sink should be empty before you left the house. As if cleanliness could keep tragedy from entering. Her phone buzzed again, a low vibration against the granite. And I didn't intend to look. I swear I didn't. But I was close enough to see the preview. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. Conference room was a mistake. The sender's name was saved as Marcus, which sounded like someone you'd call when your printer jammed or your laptop refused to cooperate. Not someone who would confess thoughts you weren't supposed to have while the dishwasher hummed behind you like a calm, indifferent heartbeat. I stood there with my hands wet, soap sliding off my fingers, staring at those words as though they were written in a language I almost understood. And behind me I heard Claire's footsteps on the stairs, bare feet. Soft, familiar. And then her voice, warm with routine, asking if I'd seen her travel mug. I turned slowly, like a man trying not to spook a deer. And I saw her in the doorway wearing the oversized gray sweater she stole from my closet years ago. Hair still damp from the shower. Skin faintly flushed. The kind of ordinary beauty that's not meant for strangers. And I realized, in a way that made my chest tighten, that I could still love her while something inside me was learning how to break. It's in the car, I lied, because silence arrived in me before anger did, because chaos would wake the children, because we had a mortgage and a calendar with pediatric appointments and school picture days circled in red. Because if I spoke then, it would turn into a fire that burned the wrong things first. She smiled, grateful, distracted, and crossed the kitchen to kiss my cheek, her lips cool and clean, her hand brushing my shoulder as if we were still the couple who touched without thinking. And that touch, so small, felt like a door closing quietly. At 7:45, we were all moving in our practiced formation. Noah refusing his jacket because he was convinced he was immune to cold. Lily, our daughter, asking for the sparkly shoes that made her feet look like tiny disco balls. Claire packing lunches with an efficiency that always impressed me, sliding apple slices into compartments, tucking in a note with a little doodle. And I watched her hands the way you watch someone you think you know. Searching for evidence of deception in the way she folded a napkin. Her wedding ring caught the light as she closed the lunchbox. And my mind did this awful thing where it pictured those same hands, ring and all, on a conference table. In a room that smelled like dry erase markers and office carpet. While someone named Marcus said her name in a way I wasn't hearing at home anymore. I felt sick, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, physical way of realizing your body has been living with the truth before your mind catches up. Like the ache that shows up days before a storm. She stood on her tiptoes to adjust Lily's ponytail, her face soft with maternal concentration. And for a second I hated myself for seeing her as two people at once. The mother who cut grapes in half because she'd read it was safer. And the woman who apparently made mistakes in conference rooms. The drive to school was ordinary. Which made it cruel. The radio playing a song Noah hated because it was too slow. Lily singing nonsense lyrics to it anyway. Claire answering a work call through the car speaker. Professional and bright. Yes, I can send that before noon. Absolutely. And I sat in the passenger seat listening to my wife's work voice. The one that had always fascinated me because it belonged to a world I wasn't part of. A world of meetings and deadlines and subtle power plays. I had married Claire when she was still finishing graduate school. Full of ambition and caffeine and hope. And I'd loved that she wanted more than our small town. More than what her mother called settling down. And now that same ambition, maybe, had dragged her into someone else's arms under fluorescent lights. At the drop-off line, she leaned over me to kiss Noah's forehead, and her perfume, something clean and citrusy, filled the space between us. And I realized I didn't want to ask her anything in front of our children. Not because I was noble, but because I couldn't bear the idea of Noah watching his father become a stranger to himself. Claire watched them walk toward the school doors, then turned back to me with a glance that held the usual question, "Are we okay? Did we forget anything?" And I wanted to say, "We forgot the truth," but instead I asked her if she wanted me to make pasta tonight. And she said yes, that would be great, and thanked me the way she always did. Like we were a team. The office where I worked was 10 minutes from hers. And that day the distance felt like an ocean. I stared at my computer screen and answered emails with my fingers operating on muscle memory while my mind kept circling that message preview like a dog returning to the same spot. Sniffing for danger. I could have grabbed her phone. Could have scrolled. Could have collected proof the way people in movies do. But I didn't. I kept remembering my parents' divorce. How my mother's grief turned into loud, sharp sentences that splintered our house. How my father defended himself with silence so heavy it felt like another person at the dinner table. And how I'd promised myself I'd never make my children live inside an argument that never ended. There was also something else. Something I didn't want to admit. That made me stay quiet. The fear that if I confronted Claire too soon, I'd watch her choose him with my own eyes. And I wasn't ready to hold that image in my hands. Silence felt like a fragile container I could keep us in until I figured out what to do with the mess at lunch. I walked to the cafe across the street, ordered a sandwich I didn't taste, and sat by the window watching strangers hurry through their own lives. I thought about the last year. The way Claire had started staying later at work. The way she'd begun sleeping on her side facing away from me. Claiming she was too warm. The way she'd been looking at herself in the mirror longer. Touching the faint line between her eyebrows like she was trying to smooth out something deeper than skin. I'd told myself it was stress. That the promotion she'd been chasing came with pressure. That our lives had simply gotten crowded and intimate moments had been pushed aside like laundry on a chair. The truth was I had been tired too. Tired in the way parents are tired. Tired in the way marriages get tired when nobody notices the slow, daily erosion of small kindnesses. I had stopped asking about her day with genuine curiosity and started asking like a checklist item. And she had started answering with summaries instead of stories. Somewhere in that space, Another voice had apparently become interesting to her. Another set of eyes had looked at her and seen not a mother, not a wife, but a woman again, and part of me understood how intoxicating that could be. Even as my stomach turned at the thought of it, understanding didn't make it hurt less, it just made the hurt more complicated. Like bruising layered under bruising. That evening, I made pasta the way I always did, with garlic sizzling in olive oil until the kitchen smelled like warmth. And Claire came home later than usual, cheeks pink from the cold, hair tucked into her coat collar, and she greeted the children with a brightness that felt slightly overdone. As if she'd been rehearsing it on the drive. She hugged Lily, lifted Noah off the ground, laughing at his protest, and then she turned to me and kissed me on the mouth. Quick and deliberate, and for a moment my body responded before my mind could stop it. The familiar softness, the taste of peppermint gum, and then the message flashed again in my head like a warning sign. Conference room was a mistake. I stepped back, pretending to reach for the pot lid, and asked how her day was. Busy, she said, hanging her keys on the hook by the door. And there it was again, no story, no detail, just a sealed box. She looked at the stove. Smells amazing, she added, and I nodded. Stirring pasta like stirring would keep me from falling apart after dinner. After baths, after Lily asked for the same bedtime story twice because she liked the part where the rabbit finds its way home. I sat on the edge of our bed while Claire brushed her hair in the bathroom mirror. The sound of the brushstrokes was steady, hypnotic, like waves, and I watched her reflection, her face without makeup, her eyes a little tired, her mouth set in a line that used to soften when she saw me. She caught me watching and smiled a small smile. "You okay?" she asked, and there was something in her tone, an edge of worry or guilt I couldn't tell, and I thought about how easy it would be to say, "No, I'm not okay. I saw the message. Tell me who Marcus is to you." But then I imagined Lily waking up thirsty, walking in on us with her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. And I imagined Noah overhearing raised voices through the vent, and I swallowed the words like they were glass. "Just tired," I said. Claire nodded as if that made sense. As if tired was the only explanation left in our marriage. She climbed into bed and turned off the lamp, and in the darkness I could hear her breathing, calm and measured, while my own breath kept catching as if my lungs couldn't decide whether to fight or surrender the next day. The message wasn't a fluke, it was a pattern. I didn't pry, not exactly, but when Claire left her phone unattended, it buzzed again and I saw another preview. "I miss you already. You were incredible." It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Unable to look away and unable to stop it, I felt anger rise, sharp and hot, but it didn't have a place to go. Because the house was full of cereal bowls and homework folders and the soft chaos of children's voices. And I kept thinking, if I explode, I'll be destroying their sense of safety as much as my own. So I did what I always do when I don't know how to feel. I gathered information. Not like a spy, not like a villain, but like a man trying to understand whether the ground under his feet was still solid. Marcus, it turned out, was not just it. He was, depending on the company's internal directory, Systems Integration Lead, which sounded like an inflated title until you realized it meant he was in every department's business. That he touched everything without being seen. That he could show up in Claire's office under the excuse of fixing a network issue and stay long enough to talk about things that weren't technical. I learned this because I went to her company's website, looked at the staff page, and saw his photo, mid-30s. Dark hair. The kind of smile that looked practiced. Not unkind but self-assured. Someone who probably knew exactly how he came across. I hated that I was studying another man's face at my desk. Zooming in as if more pixels would give me answers. I hated that my life had become a thing I researched in secret at home. Claire seemed lighter, in a way that made my chest tighten. She sang while she cooked. She laughed more easily. She started wearing lipstick again. Not loud lipstick, just a soft color that made her look awake. Our children noticed before I did. "Mommy's happy," Lily said one afternoon, dragging crayons across paper, and Claire laughed and kissed her head and said, "I'm always happy," but her eyes flicked to me for half a second, like a check to see if I believed her. I didn't know what to do with that. The idea that my wife's betrayal came packaged with a version of her I missed. As if she had borrowed joy from someone else and brought it home like takeout. The first real twist, the kind that makes your stomach drop, didn't come from her phone. It came from her mother. On Saturday, we drove to Claire's parents' house for lunch. A ritual that had become less frequent but still existed like an old habit. Her mother, Elaine, greeted us with her usual perfume and her usual judgment disguised as hospitality. Commenting on Lily's hair, on nose, growing too fast, on the casserole she'd made as if she'd invented food itself. Claire moved through the house like she had done since childhood. Slightly guarded, shoulders just a bit tense. And I watched her interact with Elaine and remembered how many of our arguments had started with Elaine's passive remarks and ended with Claire crying in our bathroom because she felt like a disappointment no matter what she achieved. Elaine had always been the kind of woman who valued appearances as if they were moral proof. And she loved our family picture in the hallway more than she loved the messy, breathing reality of us after lunch, while Claire helped her father in the garage and the kids played with old toys in the living room. Elaine cornered me in the kitchen, wiping an already clean counter with a sponge. "She's been working too much," she said casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. I nodded. "Careful. It's a demanding job." Elaine's mouth tightened. "Demanding doesn't mean neglecting your family," she said, and then, with the bluntness of someone who thinks she's doing you a favor, she added, "I hope you're paying attention. Ethan, men get complacent. Women wander when they feel unseen." My name in her mouth felt like a warning. My heart hammered. "What do you mean?" I asked, though my voice stayed even. Elaine looked at me, eyes sharp, and for a second I thought she knew. That she was about to confirm everything. But then she sniffed and said, "I mean what I said," and turned away, as if she'd planted a seed and didn't care what grew. On the drive home, Claire was quiet. Noah fell asleep with his head tilted awkwardly. Lily pressed her face to the window, leaving fog marks, and Claire's fingers gripped the steering wheel a little too tightly. "Your mom was weird today," I said finally, testing the waters. Claire's jaw clenched. "She's always weird," she replied, but there was a tremor in it. She said something about women wandering when they feel unseen. I said, and I watched Claire's reaction with a kind of detached horror. Like watching a scientist observe a chemical reaction they didn't expect. Her knuckles went white for a moment. Then she exhaled slowly and said, "She thinks she's an expert on marriage because she's been unhappy for 30 years. The bitterness in her voice was raw, almost honest, and it made something shift in me. A small crack of empathy in the middle of my pain. "Have you been unhappy?" I asked, softly, because if I asked it loudly it would become an accusation. Claire glanced at me, and the look on her face wasn't guilt exactly, it was something like exhaustion. Like she'd been holding up a wall and suddenly realized she couldn't keep holding it forever. "I don't know," she said after a long pause. And the simplicity of that answer hurt more than any lie that night. After the kids were asleep, Claire stood in the doorway of our bedroom as if she wasn't sure she belonged there. She picked at the hem of her sweater. "Ethan," she began, and my heart punched against my ribs. Because I thought, this is it, she's going to confess, she's going to say his name out loud. And I didn't know if I wanted to hear it. But then she said, "Do you ever feel like you're doing everything right and it still doesn't matter?" Her voice was small, and I saw, suddenly, the version of Claire that existed under the polished work persona. The girl who had grown up with a mother who measured love in performance. I wanted to reach for her. I wanted to shake her. Instead I patted the bed beside me. Careful, and she sat, leaving space between us like a third person. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but it does matter. You matter." Claire's eyes filled, not with dramatic tears, but with the slow gathering of emotion that someone tries to keep from showing. She nodded, swallowing. "I don't know how we got here," she whispered. And there it was, we. Not me, not you. As if she was asking for a map back to something safer. Silence. I realized then, wasn't just avoidance, it was also time. Time to see if she would choose her family or the thrill of being seen by someone else. Time to decide whether my love was a shelter or a trap. Time to prepare myself for a confrontation that wouldn't destroy the children. I lay awake later, listening to Claire's breathing, and I made a promise to myself that felt strange but steady. I would not become my father. Disappearing into cold quiet, and I would not become my mother. Bleeding pain into every room. If I was going to face this, I would do it like an adult. Like a parent. Like a man who could hold grief without throwing it. The problem was that holding it didn't mean it wasn't crushing me. 2 weeks passed like that. Each day a tightrope. Claire's phone buzzed. Claire smiled at messages she claimed were work. Claire kissed the kids. Claire ate dinner with us. I watched. I listened. And I learned the rhythms of her deception the way you learn the rhythm of rain against a roof. Constant enough to become background noise until you suddenly realize the house is flooding. The next twist came on a Wednesday. When Noah's school called to say he'd fallen on the playground and might need stitches. I left work immediately, called Claire, and she said she was in a meeting but would meet us at the urgent care. The urgent care waiting room smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. And Noah sat on my lap trying to be brave. Blood dried at his eyebrow. While Lily drew pictures on the back of a receipt. Claire arrived 20 minutes later. Breathless. Hair slightly disheveled. Cheeks too flushed for someone who'd just come from a conference room. And she hugged Noah so tightly he complained. "I'm here," she kept saying. "I'm here," like she was reassuring herself as much as him. When the nurse called No's name, Claire stood up and her phone slipped from her pocket, screen lighting as it hit the floor. I saw it without meaning to. The message preview was right there, bright as a confession. He almost caught us. We have to be more careful. My vision narrowed. My throat went dry. Claire scooped up the phone so fast her movements looked panicked. And she glanced at me, eyes wide, searching my face. For a second, time held its breath. Noah tugged at her sleeve, asking if the stitches would hurt. Lily asked if she could get a lollipop. The nurse waited, clipboard in hand. Claire's face, my wife's face, shifted into that practiced calm again. And she smiled at the nurse and said, "Sorry," and followed us down the hallway as if the world hadn't just split open. But I had seen it. Not just the affair, something worse. He almost caught us. That meant there had been a moment, recently, where the secrecy had been threatened, where the thrill had been strong enough that they were careless. And Claire's first instinct wasn't to stop. It was to hide better. That night, after the children were asleep and Noah had proudly shown off his tiny bandage like a badge of honor, I went into the kitchen and stared at the sink full of dishes. The same kind of dishes my father would have insisted be cleaned before bed. And I felt something in me settle, heavy and clear. Silence had bought me time. But it was time I was spending like a man bleeding slowly. And there was only so long you could pretend you weren't dying. I heard Claire's footsteps behind me. "You didn't have to do the dishes," she said gently, slipping her arms around my waist from behind, resting her cheek between my shoulder blades. Her embrace used to feel like home. Now it felt like a costume she didn't know she was wearing. I didn't move. "Claire," I said, and my voice sounded calm enough to scare me. "Who is Marcus?" Her arms froze around me. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant, soft rush of the baby monitor. Claire didn't answer right away, and in that pause I felt the shape of our marriage. The way it was suspended between truth and denial. And I understood that whatever came next would be one of those moments you remember for the rest of your life. Not because it was loud, but because it changed the air you breathed. Claire's fingers loosened. She stepped back. I turned to face her. And in the kitchen light her eyes looked older than they had a month ago. As if she'd been living with a weight too. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Why are you asking me that?" she whispered. And I realized she was still trying to choose a story. Still trying to decide whether to lie. Still calculating how much truth I deserved. I looked at her for a long moment. Then said, "Because I saw your phone." And I watched her face collapse. Not dramatically, not with theatrical sobs, but with the slow surrender of someone caught in a storm they pretended wasn't coming. She pressed a hand to her forehead, eyes squeezing shut, and when she spoke, it came out like a confession she'd been choking on. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said. "I didn't plan it. I didn't interrupt. I didn't demand details yet. I just stood there, hands braced on the counter, feeling my heart beat in my ears." Claire's shoulders shook once, and she took a breath like she was stepping off a cliff. "It started as work," she said, voice trembling. "He helped me with a project. And he listened. Ethan. He actually listened. And I know that sounds like such a stupid cliché. But it felt like I was a person again. Not just a schedule. Not just a mother. Not just someone trying to be perfect all the time. She looked at me then, eyes wet, and there was shame in them. But there was also something else, a desperate need to be understood. To be forgiven without being excused. I hate myself for it, she said, and I believed her, which was its own kind of tragedy. The words I wanted to say were sharp and immediate. How could you? How long did you bring it into our home? Did you ever look at me after being with him and not feel sick? But my promise to myself held. Thin but real. I asked the question that mattered most. The one that would determine whether we were broken beyond repair. Do you want to be married to me? I said quietly, and my voice didn't crack. But something in my chest did. Claire stared at me as if the question was a mirror she was afraid to look into. Her lips parted. She shook her head slightly. Not no, not yes. Just shaking like she was trying to clear fog. I don't know, she whispered again. And this time it landed like a stone. Outside, the streetlights cast pale stripes across our living room floor. Upstairs, our children slept, unaware that their parents' world was tipping. Claire covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a sob. I watched her and realized that the woman in front of me wasn't a villain in a story. She was my wife, flawed and scared and craving something she didn't know how to ask for. And I was her husband, standing on the other side of a line that used to feel solid. Silence had kept the chaos away from the kids. But now the chaos was here, contained between us in the kitchen. And it was my job to decide what kind of man I would be in it. What kind of ending my children would inherit. What kind of dignity Claire would be allowed to keep, even if she had shattered my trust. I took a slow breath and said, "Then we're going to find out." And Claire looked at me, trembling, as if she'd expected me to scream, to throw something, to become someone else. And I didn't, because I wasn't just protecting her from my anger. I was protecting the future from becoming a wasteland. But here's what's going to happen. I continued, voice steady. We're not doing this in front of the kids. We're not turning our house into a battlefield. And you're not going back into that office pretending nothing is wrong while I rot quietly. Claire's eyes squeezed shut and she nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Okay, she whispered, okay. And in that moment, quiet, brutal, strangely calm, I realized the affair was not the only secret in our marriage. The other secret was how close we'd been to losing each other long before Marcus ever typed a message. How many small hurts we'd swallowed until someone else offered Claire a place to spit them out. The next day would bring consequences, decisions, boundaries, and revelations I hadn't anticipated, including one that would tie Marcus not just to Claire's workplace but to her family in a way that made my blood run cold. But for that single night, we stood in the kitchen like two people at the edge of a river, holding the broken pieces of a life we'd built, trying to decide whether to cross together or let the current take us. The next morning I woke before my alarm, eyes open in the dark, listening to the house breathe around me. The quiet had layers, the furnace clicking on, the faint whir of the refrigerator downstairs, the soft, intermittent static of the baby monitor even though our children were long past needing it. A habit we hadn't broken because routines are easier than emotions. And beside me Claire lay on her back staring at the ceiling. Not sleeping. The silhouette of her face turned upward as if she were waiting for something to fall. We didn't touch. We didn't speak. It wasn't punishment. Not exactly. It was self-preservation. Like two people holding their breath underwater because they don't trust the surface anymore. When the alarm finally went off, its cheerful chime sounded obscene, and Claire flinched as if it had shouted. She swung her legs out of bed and went to the bathroom without a word, closing the door gently, always gently, because even now she was trying to keep the house intact by controlling the volume of every movement. As if silence could put the truth back where it came from. I sat up and pressed my palms into my eyes until I saw stars. Then dragged myself downstairs to start coffee. Because no matter what your marriage is doing, children still need breakfast. And the cruelty of that normalcy was that it forced you to function when you wanted to crumble. Noah came down first. Hair sticking up at the crown like a rooster, rubbing sleep from his eyes. And he asked for pancakes with the certainty of someone who believes their desires have a direct line to the universe. Lily followed, wrapped in her blanket like a tiny queen, and crawled into my lap at the table, warm and heavy, and for a moment I closed my eyes and let the weight of her trust anchor me. Claire entered a few minutes later, dressed for work, blouse buttoned too precisely, hair pulled back tighter than usual, makeup done as if she were painting a shield on her face. She kissed the kids, avoided my eyes, and set about packing lunches with mechanical efficiency. Watching her, I felt anger rise again, but it came tangled with grief. Because this woman moving through our kitchen like a stranger, was not who she wanted to be either. And yet she had become her own betrayal. When Noah asked, mouth full of pancake, if Mommy could come to his math night next week. Claire's hands froze on the lunchbox zipper. Of course, she said quickly, voice bright. Then glanced at me as if searching for permission or forgiveness. I nodded once, because I would not punish our children for the sins of adults. And Claire's shoulders sagged in relief so subtle only someone who had lived with her for 10 years would notice after drop-off. The car felt too quiet. Claire gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale. I watched the traffic lights change. Watched pedestrians cross streets with coffee cups and headphones. And I thought about the fact that everyone around us had no idea our world was cracking. And somehow that anonymity felt like both mercy and insult. Claire cleared her throat. I'm sorry, she said, and the words sounded small, like a coin dropped into a deep well. I didn't answer right away. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because I didn't trust my first response. I'm not asking for apologies in the car. I finally said, I'm asking for honesty, and I'm asking for you to understand what you did doesn't stay between you and him. It spills. It always spills. Claire's jaw trembled. I know, she whispered. I didn't think, you did think. I interrupted, sharper than I intended, and her flinch made something in me regret the tone even as it agreed with the sentiment. You thought about being caught. I continued, forcing my voice down. You thought about being careful. That means you knew. Claire swallowed hard, eyes on the road. I knew, she admitted, and I kept going anyway. We pulled into the parking lot of her building. A sleek glass and steel structure that always looked like it belonged in a city slightly more important than ours. Claire sat with her hands in her lap, staring straight ahead. What happens now? She asked. Voice tight. I took a slow breath. Now you're going to tell him it's over, I said, Claire's eyes flicked to mine. Panic flashing. Ethan. Today, I added, leaving no room for negotiation. And if you can't do it, if you're not willing, then you're telling me something else. And I will act accordingly. Claire's throat bobbed. I can, she whispered. I can do it. I watched her for a long moment. Then said, you're also going to request a transfer. Or you're going to talk to or you're going to find a new job. I don't care which option you choose. But you're not staying in the same environment where you can slip into a conference room and pretend your life isn't waiting at home. Claire's eyes filled. That's my career, she said, the words half plea, half protest. Our family is also your career. I replied, and something in her face crumpled as if she'd been slapped by the truth before she got out of the car. I said one more thing. The thing I'd been holding like a knife in my pocket. And you're going to tell me who knows. I said. Claire paused, fingers on the door handle. What do you mean? Your mother. I said quietly. She said something. Either she knows or she suspects. I want the truth. Claire's eyes widened, then narrowed. Then she looked away. She doesn't know, she said, too quickly. Claire, I warned, and my voice was calm again. Which was more dangerous? Claire exhaled, shoulders collapsing. She suspects. She admitted. She's good at smelling weakness. The bitterness returned. I didn't tell her. Ethan, I swear, I believed she hadn't told Elaine. Not because Claire was incapable of confession, but because Elaine would have weaponized it already. Still, the fact that Elaine could sense something and had chosen to needle me about women wandering made my skin crawl. Fine, I said, but she stays out of this. And if she tries to meddle, you shut it down. Claire nodded, biting her lip. Okay. She got out of the car, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the building with the posture of someone heading into battle. Not because she was brave, but because she had no other way to survive at my office. I tried to work. I really did, but my mind kept replaying everything. The messages, the urgent care preview, Claire's confession, the way she'd said she didn't know if she wanted to be married to me. As if our marriage was a coat she could take off when it got too heavy. Around noon, my phone vibrated with a text from Claire. He wants to talk in person. I told him no. He's insisting. My chest tightened. I stared at the screen, feeling the old instinct to stay quiet, to avoid escalation, to keep things contained. But containment is fragile when other people push at the walls. I typed back. No private meetings. Tell him it's over in writing. Copy HR if you have to. A minute later, he says he'll go to my mom. The words hit me like ice water. My fingers went cold. Claire's mother was not just a meddler, she was a predator in family clothing. Someone who would feed on scandal the way some people feed on sugar. If Marcus threatened Elaine, it meant he knew enough to believe he could control Claire with the fear of humiliation. It meant he understood something about her history, her vulnerability, her terror of disappointing her mother. And that, more than the sex, more than the secrecy, made me furious. Because it meant this man had not just taken a piece of my marriage. He had exploited the bruises Claire already carried. I typed, "What do you mean he'll go to your mom?" The reply came fast. He said he knows her. He said she'll understand and help us. I sat back in my chair. Heart hammering. And for a moment the office around me blurred. The hum of fluorescent lights turning into a distant roar. He knows her. He knows Elaine. My mind scrambled, trying to connect dots that didn't want to connect. Claire had grown up in this town. Yes, but she hadn't worked at this company until a few years ago. And Elaine's world was mostly charity events, church committees, neighborhood influence. How would a systems integration lead know her well enough to threaten her? Unless the tie was older, deeper. I realized then that the next twist I'd sensed, the one I'd told myself was coming, was already here, tightening its grip. I left work early with a headache that felt like a vice. Drove to Claire's parents' house without calling first. Because I didn't trust phone conversations anymore. They left too much room for manipulation. Elaine opened the door with her usual smile, which faltered when she saw my face. "Ethan," she said, voice coated with concern that felt performative. "Is everything all right?" I stepped inside. The smell of her house, polish, potpourri, a faint hint of onion from lunch, wrapping around me like a memory I didn't want. "We need to talk," I said. Elaine's eyes flicked toward the hallway as if checking whether anyone else could hear. "About what?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew it would be unpleasant. I didn't accept the offer of tea she made automatically. Because accepting tea from Elaine always meant agreeing to play by her rules. "Do you know a man named Marcus?" I asked, and I watched her face for the smallest twitch. Elaine's expression held for a beat too long, then shifted into something sharper. "Marcus who?" she asked. But the question was too controlled, like she was buying time to decide what to reveal. "Marcus," I repeated, "from Claire's office." Elaine's lips pressed together. "I don't keep track of your wife's coworkers," she said, and her dismissiveness was meant to close the topic. But it only confirmed what I'd suspected. She was lying. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "He threatened Claire," I said. "He said he knows you. He said he'd come to you." Elaine's eyes narrowed. Then something like irritation flickered across her face, as if she were offended someone had invoked her name without permission. "Threatened her how?" she asked. And the fact that she didn't ask why was a tell. Elaine didn't need the backstory. She was already inside it. I held her gaze. "Why does he think you'll help him?" I asked. Elaine's jaw tightened. "Because men like that assume women will side with them if they talk in the right language," she said, waving a hand as if swatting away an insect. "I don't know what nonsense he's feeding Claire. But, stop," I said, quietly, and my voice had that steady tone that made Elaine blink. "I'm not here for deflection. I'm here for the truth." Elaine's nostrils flared. She stared at me for a long moment. Then, with a sigh heavy enough to sound like martyrdom, she said, "Fine. Yes, I know him." My stomach dropped. "How?" I asked, and my throat felt tight around the word. Elaine walked to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, drank it slowly, as if she were preparing for a performance. "Marcus was friends with my nephew," she said, meaning Claire's cousin, meaning family. "They grew up together. They ran in the same circles. He's been around." She said it like that explained everything. Like the word around made him harmless. I stared at her. "So he's known your family for years?" I said, more statement than question. Elaine shrugged. This town is small. Everyone knows everyone. My hands curled into fists. Then why is he in Claire's phone under it? I asked. Because that detail felt like proof of deliberate concealment. Elaine's eyes flickered. Because Claire is not stupid. Elaine said, and the words hit with a cruelty she didn't even attempt to mask. She knew what she was doing. The rage that rose in me was hot and immediate. But underneath it was a sickening realization. Elaine wasn't shocked, wasn't horrified, wasn't even deeply concerned. She was annoyed. As if this was an inconvenient mess that might embarrass her. Did you suspect? I asked. Elaine's mouth tightened. A mother senses things. She said, Claire has always been restless. She said it like a diagnosis. And you, she added, eyes scanning me as if assessing my worth. You've always been steady, which is good, but steadiness can become complacency. The same line she'd thrown at me before. Now sharpened with context. I felt my vision narrow. So you hinted, I said. You tried to poke at it. Elaine lifted her chin. I tried to protect my daughter. She said, and I almost laughed at the audacity. Protect her from what? I asked. Consequences? Elaine's eyes flashed. From being trapped in a life that doesn't fulfill her. She snapped. From shrinking into motherhood and mediocrity because everyone expects her to. There it was. Finally, Elaine's core belief dressed up as concern. That Claire's life should look impressive. Not necessarily feel good. That fulfillment came from attention and achievement. Not from the quiet work of loving someone when it's hard. And in that moment, I understood something painful. Claire's affair wasn't born in a vacuum. It grew in the shadow of a mother who taught her that being wanted was the same as being valued. I took a slow breath, forcing myself not to escalate. Because this was Elaine's arena, emotion as warfare, and I refused to bleed out on her kitchen floor. Marcus threatened her, I repeated, keeping my voice flat. He's trying to manipulate her using you. Are you going to let him? Elaine's lips thinned. For a moment, I saw calculation behind her eyes. If he comes to me, she said slowly, I will handle it. Handle it how? I asked. Elaine's gaze sharpened. By doing what needs to be done. She replied, and the vagueness was chilling because it meant she was thinking about optics. About control, not about Claire's well-being. No, I said, and the word was quiet but absolute. Elaine blinked. Excuse me? You don't handle anything. I said, you don't get to insert yourself into this and turn it into a story you can manage. If Marcus contacts you, you tell him to stop. You tell him to leave Claire alone. And if you don't, if you try to use this to punish her or to punish me, I will protect my children from you. Elaine's face went pale with indignation. Protect them from me, she repeated, as if tasting the insult. You think you can cut me out? I think I can set boundaries. I replied, and my calm made her angrier than shouting would have. And I will. Elaine's voice dropped, venomous. You don't understand my daughter. She hissed. You never did. I held her gaze. Maybe not, I admitted, but I understand my children. And I understand that they deserve adults who don't turn their pain into a spectacle. I left her house with my hands shaking. Not from fear but from adrenaline. And in the car I sat for a full minute before starting the engine. Staring at the steering wheel as if it could tell me the next move. My phone buzzed again. Claire. He's waiting near my car. The words snapped me into motion. I drove to her building. The winter sky low and gray. The world washed in a color that made everything feel more serious. My mind raced through possibilities. Should I call the police? Would that be overkill? Would that create the chaos I'd been trying to avoid? But then I thought of Claire walking alone to her car with a man who felt entitled to corner her. And my restraint turned into a different kind of resolve. There are moments when silence becomes complicity. I pulled into the parking lot and spotted Claire immediately. Standing near her car with her arms crossed. Posture rigid. Face turned slightly away from a man leaning casually against the adjacent vehicle as if he belonged there. Marcus. Even from a distance, I could see his confidence. The way he took up space with the lazy assurance of someone who believes the world will accommodate him. Claire saw me and her eyes widened, relief, fear, shame. All at once, and Marcus's head turned toward my car. His gaze landing on me with curiosity rather than alarm. I parked and got out. The cold air biting my lungs. And as I walked toward them I felt strangely calm. As if my body had finally chosen a path after weeks of hovering at the edge. Marcus straightened as I approached. Smile appearing like a mask sliding into place. "Ethan," he said, and my stomach lurched because he knew my name without introduction. Claire's face tightened. "Don't," she warned him softly, but he ignored her. "I've heard a lot about you," Marcus continued, tone smooth, as if we were being introduced at a barbecue. "I didn't know you were coming." I stopped a few feet away, close enough to see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the expensive watch on his wrist, the eyes that held too much certainty. "You shouldn't be here," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Marcus's smile didn't fade, but his eyes sharpened. "I'm just talking to Claire," he said, hands raised slightly in a gesture of innocence that felt rehearsed. "We need closure." Claire's jaw trembled. "I told you it's over," she said, voice tight. Marcus looked at her with something like pity. "You don't get to decide that unilaterally," he said softly, and the entitlement in the sentence made my skin crawl. I stepped closer. Not aggressively, but with purpose, positioning myself slightly between them without touching either. "You're done," I said to Marcus. "You will not speak to my wife outside of professional channels. You will not contact her privately. If you do, we will involve HR and legal counsel. If you're waiting by her car again, we'll involve security." Marcus laughed under his breath. Amused. "Legal counsel," he repeated, like the words were cute. "Ethan, don't make this bigger than it has to be." I stared at him. "It already is," I said, and I watched his smile finally falter. Just a fraction. When he realized I wasn't begging, wasn't bargaining, wasn't performing masculine outrage for his entertainment. Marcus's gaze slid to Claire. "Is that what you want?" he asked her, voice dropping, intimate, as if I wasn't there. "To run back to him because it's easier?" Claire's eyes flashed, shame mixing with anger, and I saw her shoulders straighten. "I want you to leave me alone," she said, and her voice was steadier than I'd heard it in weeks. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Your mother won't like this," he murmured, and the words were a hook thrown with deliberate cruelty. Claire flinched. My blood went cold. He knew exactly where to press. "Don't talk about my mother," Claire snapped, and there was something fierce in it, something protective of the child she used to be. Marcus shrugged. feigning innocence. I'm just saying she understands you. He said. She understands wanting more. It was like watching a predator circle. He was trying to isolate her. To make her feel misunderstood by me. To make Elaine the inevitable ally. I felt the old impulse to explode. To punch something. To do the simple, primitive thing. But I didn't. I kept my voice even because I understood. Suddenly, that what Marcus fed on was reaction. You don't understand her, I said, and Marcus turned his gaze to me. Amused again. Oh, he replied, and you do? I held his eyes. I understand that she's scared. I said, and you're using it. That's not love. That's leverage. Claire's breath caught. Marcus's face hardened. The mask slipping. For a second, his charm dropped and something uglier showed through. Irritation. Contempt. You think you're the hero here, he said quietly, stepping closer. And I didn't move. You think silence makes you noble. It doesn't. It makes you weak. There it was. His attempt to rewrite the story. To cast my restraint as failure. To trigger me into proving myself. I felt my heart pound. But I kept my expression neutral. I'm not here to be a hero. I said, I'm here to end this. Marcus's lips curled. You can't end what she started, he said, and he looked at Claire like she belonged to him. Claire's face went pale, then flushed, and she spoke before I could. I didn't start it alone, she said, and the honesty in that was brutal. But then she added, voice firm, and I'm ending it now. Marcus laughed again. But it was sharper this time. Less charming. Sure, he said, end it. Just remember you don't get to erase what we were. He leaned closer to Claire, lowering his voice. But I heard it anyway because the cold air carried everything. You'll come back, he murmured. You always do. Claire's eyes filled, but instead of collapsing, she lifted her chin. No, she said, and the word rang with something new, self-respect. I won't. Marcus's gaze flicked to me, and the calculation returned. Then I guess we'll see what Elaine has to say, he said, and he stepped back, already turning away as if he had won by threatening the right person. My phone was in my pocket. I could have recorded. I should have. The thought arrived too late. And I hated that I hadn't been more prepared. Hated that in trying to keep things civil I had underestimated how dirty someone could play. Marcus walked toward the building with his hands in his pockets. Posture relaxed, as if he hadn't just tried to emotionally blackmail my wife in a parking lot. Claire stood shaking, tears in her eyes, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold her pieces together. I turned to her. Are you okay? I asked softly. Claire shook her head, a small, helpless movement. He knows her, she whispered, voice breaking. He knows exactly how to get to me. I nodded slowly. Then we're going to take that weapon away, I said in the car. Claire stared out the window. Silent, cheeks wet. I drove without speaking for a few minutes, letting the quiet hold us. Because forcing conversation in the middle of panic only makes it worse. Finally, Claire whispered, my mom, she introduced us. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? I asked, keeping my voice controlled. Claire's eyes closed. Years ago, she said, voice barely audible. Before I met you, I was 22. I'd just graduated. My mom thought he was a good match. He was charming, and she liked his family. And she liked how he looked next to me. She swallowed hard. We went on a few dates. It didn't become anything. I didn't like how he made me feel. Like I owed him something. Her voice cracked. When I started at the company and saw his name on the directory, I felt sick. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to think. She shook her head. Frustrated. Ashamed. And then he started helping me on projects. He started being different, or acting different, and She pressed her palm to her forehead, as if trying to hold her mind in place. God, Ethan, I feel disgusting. The confession landed in me with a strange blend of anger and clarity. This wasn't a random coworker affair. This was an old thread pulled from Claire's past, tied to her mother's expectations, wrapped around her insecurity, tightened by a man who knew exactly how to apply pressure. It didn't excuse her choices. Not even close. But it made the landscape more complex. And complexity, I was learning, didn't make pain smaller. It just made it harder to simplify into hate when we got home. The kids were still at school. The house empty, which made it the first place all week where we could speak without whispering. Claire stood in the living room like she didn't know where to put her body. I set my keys down and said, "We're doing this right." Claire's eyes flicked to mine. "What does that mean?" she asked, voice trembling. "It means we're building boundaries." I said, "Real ones. With Marcus. With your mother. With ourselves." Claire let out a shaky breath. "I don't know how," she admitted, and I saw fear there. Fear of losing her job. Fear of losing her family's image. Fear of losing me. Fear of being alone with her own mistakes. I nodded once. "Then we learn," I said. "But first, you write him a message. Now. Clear. Final. No emotion. No room." Claire hesitated. Then pulled out her phone with hands that shook. She sat on the couch, opened a new message, and stared at the blank screen like it was a cliff edge. "What do I say?" she whispered. I stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel I was there. "You say, this relationship was inappropriate. It is over. Do not contact me outside of work. Any further contact will be reported to HR." I said, and my voice sounded like someone else's, calm, legal, unromantic. Claire's eyes filled again. "That sounds so cold," she murmured. "It needs to be," I replied. "Warmth is what got us here." Claire swallowed, typed, paused, erased, typed again, then finally hit send. The tiny swoosh sound felt like a door clicking shut. Not because it fixed anything, but because it ended one avenue of fantasy. Claire sagged back, shaking. "Now what?" she asked. "Now we call a counselor," I said. Claire blinked at me. "You want therapy?" she asked, as if the idea was both relief and humiliation. "I want someone who knows how to hold this without letting it destroy our children," I replied. Claire's mouth trembled. "And us?" she asked softly. I looked at her for a long moment, then told the truth I could live with. "I don't know what happens to us," I said, "but I know what happens if we try to do this alone. We'll turn into monsters. And I won't." Claire nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Okay," she whispered. The next call was harder. "Elaine." Claire stared at her phone like it was a weapon. "I can't," she said, voice shaking. She'll make it about her. She'll shame me. Then you put me on speaker." I said, and Claire's eyes widened. Ethan, I'm not doing this to fight your mother. I clarified. I'm doing it so you don't walk into her alone. Claire swallowed, then nodded. She pressed call. The ringing sounded like a countdown. Elaine answered on the second ring. Voice bright. Claire, darling, Mom. Claire cut in, and her voice was strained. I need to tell you something. There was a pause. The subtle shift of Elaine sensing drama. Is everything all right? Elaine asked, sweetness tightening. Claire's eyes darted to mine. I nodded, steadying her. No, Claire said, and her voice cracked. I made a mistake, a big one, and Marcus is threatening me. He's using you. Silence on the line. Then Elaine exhaled sharply, as if irritated rather than concerned. Marcus? She said. Why is his name in your mouth? Claire flinched. I leaned closer and spoke into the phone. Voice calm. Elaine. This is Ethan, I said. Elaine's inhale was audible. Ethan, she replied, and her tone cooled, as if my presence contaminated her control. This is a private conversation between mother and daughter. It's not, I said evenly, because your involvement is being used to harass Claire, and because our children will not be collateral damage in your power games. Elaine's voice sharpened. Power games, she repeated. How dramatic. Claire's shoulders shook. Mom, please, she whispered. I need you to just listen. Elaine clicked her tongue. The sound of impatience. If you're calling to confess some indiscretion, she began, and Claire's face twisted as if struck. I cut in. We are calling to set a boundary. I said, Marcus is not welcome. If he contacts you, you tell him to stop. You do not discuss Claire's marriage with him. You do not attempt to manage this. If you try to use this to shame Claire or to undermine our family, you will lose access to your grandchildren. The word grandchildren landed like a hammer. Elaine went silent, and for the first time, I heard something like uncertainty beneath her control. You wouldn't, she said finally, and her voice had lost some of its polish. Watch me, I replied, and I hated how cold it sounded. But boundaries with Elaine required steel. Claire stared at the floor, tears dripping onto her hands. Elaine's breath came sharp. Claire, she said, ignoring me, voice turning syrupy. What have you done? Claire made a small sound, like a sob swallowed. I'm trying to fix it, she whispered. Then you stop being weak. Elaine snapped, and Claire flinched so hard it was physical. I felt a surge of anger, protective and bright. Enough, I said. Elaine, your daughter is not weak. She's human, and your habit of calling her weak is exactly why someone like Marcus could get his hooks into her. Elaine sucked in a breath. Offended. Don't psychoanalyze me, she hissed. I raised her. You raised her to fear you, I replied, and my voice was steady because the truth had finally become simple. And we are done letting that fear run our lives. There was a long silence, and I could almost hear Elaine recalibrating, calculating what tone would restore control without losing access to the children. Finally, she said, clipped, fine. If he calls, I'll handle it. You'll tell him to stop. I corrected. That's all. Elaine's jaw must have tightened. I could hear it in the pause. Yes, she said, I'll tell him. Claire's shoulders sagged in a wave of relief so intense it looked like pain. Thank you, Claire whispered, though gratitude toward Elaine felt like a reflex more than a choice when the call ended. Claire dropped the phone onto the couch and covered her face, sobbing quietly, shoulders shaking, grief and shame pouring out now that the immediate crisis had passed. I stood there, watching, feeling the ache in my chest deepen. Because even though she had hurt me, I couldn't look at her pain without feeling something shift in me toward compassion, not forgiveness. Not yet, but recognition. This was the woman I'd built a life with. This was the mother of my children. She had made choices that wounded me. But she was also drowning in a history that had taught her love came with conditions. I sat on the coffee table across from her. Close enough to be present. Not close enough to pretend intimacy we didn't have. "Claire," I said softly, and she looked up, eyes swollen, mascara smudged. "You don't get to disappear into shame." I told her, "Shame makes you selfish. It makes you focus on your own pain instead of the damage you caused. If we're doing this, you stay here. You face it." Claire nodded shakily. "I will," she whispered. "I will." My phone buzzed in my pocket. A new email notification. The subject line made my stomach drop before I even opened it. Urgent. HR confidential. Report of inappropriate conduct. It was from Claire's company domain. My heart pounded. I opened it. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Claire. But she had set her email to forward certain company alerts to our shared family account for calendar syncing years ago. A small administrative choice now turning into an unexpected collision. The email was formal, sterile. HR had received an anonymous report regarding inappropriate conduct involving Claire and another employee. A meeting was requested. My chest tightened. "Claire," I said, voice low, and she looked at me. Alarm flaring. "What?" she asked. I turned the screen toward her. Her face drained of color. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." I watched her hands tremble as she read. The reality sinking in. Marcus wasn't just threatening Elaine. He was already escalating. Or someone else had seen. Or the affair had been less secret than she believed. Claire's breath came fast. Panicked. "I'll lose my job," she whispered. And the fear in her eyes wasn't only about money, it was about identity. About the one place she felt competent and admired. "Maybe," I said quietly, "or maybe you get to tell the truth before he tells it for you." Claire shook her head rapidly. "They'll label me," she whispered. Listen," I said, firm but not cruel. "Your dignity doesn't come from their label. It comes from what you do next." Claire stared at me, tears spilling again. And I realized the next chapter of our story wasn't just about marriage. It was about whether Claire could choose herself in a way that didn't depend on men, on her mother, on an office's approval. Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. The sound made Claire jump. I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the next steps settle onto my shoulders. The chaos I'd been avoiding was knocking at our door anyway, dressed in HR language and family manipulation. And now my choice wasn't between silence and chaos, it was between controlled truth and uncontrolled scandal. I looked at Claire, saw the fear, the shame, the fragile determination, and I said the only thing that felt like a path forward. "We're going to meet HR," I told her, "and we're going to do it with a plan." We met HR the next afternoon. Not because it was convenient. Not because Claire was ready. but because waiting would have handed Marcus the steering wheel and Claire had spent too many years letting other people drive her life. The conference room they put us in was painfully ordinary, gray carpet. A long table with faint scratches. A bowl of mints no one ever ate. A window that looked out at a parking garage, yet my pulse kept thudding as if we were walking into court. And Claire sat beside me with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles looked bloodless. Chin lifted a fraction higher than usual as if posture could hold back collapse. The HR manager, a woman named Denise with gentle eyes and a voice trained to remain steady in storms, began with policy language, with phrases like professional conduct and duty of care. And I watched Claire's face as each sentence landed. She flinched at first. Then slowly, something hardened into place, not cruelty, not denial, but the kind of self-possession you see when someone decides they will not beg to be treated like a human. Denise explained an anonymous complaint had been filed. That preliminary information suggested an inappropriate relationship between Claire and another employee. That the company had obligations to investigate. And Claire swallowed hard and spoke before fear could steal her voice. It happened, she said, and my stomach tightened at the simplicity of it. The brutal honesty. The refusal to hide behind excuses. And it was wrong. And it's over. And I want to cooperate fully. But I also need to report that Marcus has been contacting me outside of work. Waiting for me near my car. And threatening to involve my family if I don't engage with him. Denise's pen paused. Her expression didn't change dramatically. But I saw the subtle shift. The moment where the narrative stopped being two people made a mistake and started being one person is using pressure. Claire slid her phone across the table with hands that trembled but did not retreat, showing the written message she'd sent ending contact and his replies that tried to bargain. Then to needle, then to threaten with a line that made my jaw clench. Elaine will tell you you're making a mistake. Denise read, lips tightening, and said quietly, "Thank you for bringing this forward, and for the first time in weeks." Claire's shoulders dropped a fraction, as if some part of her had been carrying the fear alone and was now allowed to set it down. The investigation was not kind, not warm, but it was fair. Denise asked questions that forced Claire to look at her own choices without drowning in them. And Claire answered with a steadiness that surprised even her, admitting where she had lied, where she had hidden, where she had saved his name under it, because she wanted the thrill without consequences. And when Denise asked why, Claire's eyes flicked toward me, then back. And she said, voice rough, because I didn't know how to ask for help without feeling like a failure. That sentence cracked something open in the room, not as an excuse, but as a truth, and I felt my own anger shift into something heavier and more useful, grief with purpose. Denise took notes. Then told Claire the company would place her on paid administrative leave during the investigation and that Marcus would be instructed to have no contact with her outside strictly necessary professional matters. And that security would be alerted. It wasn't vindication. Not yet, but it was a boundary written in policy language, which mattered because men like Marcus respected paperwork more than pleas. When we left the building, Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath underwater. And in the car she stared straight ahead, tears spilling silently, not from collapse but from release. And she whispered, I told the truth. Like she needed to hear herself say it. Like it was a new muscle she was learning how to use. "You did," I answered, and my voice was softer than I expected, because I realized that as much as her betrayal had wounded me, her honesty now was the only way forward for either of us. Together or apart, Marcus didn't disappear quietly the way predators rarely do. 2 days later, Elaine called Claire in a fury. Voice so sharp it could have cut glass, screaming that a nice young man had come to her door in tears. That Claire was ruining his life. That Claire was humiliating the family. And I watched Claire take the call in our living room with her phone on speaker. Her whole body braced as if for impact, while Lily colored at the coffee table and Noah built a tower of blocks, their laughter punctuating the conversation like innocence refusing to leave. "Mom," Claire said, voice shaking at first, then steadier, "he is not a nice young man. He is manipulating you, and you are not welcome to comment on my marriage or my work situation." Elaine scoffed, launching into a speech about reputation and gratitude and how Claire would regret throwing away an opportunity to be adored. And Claire's hand trembled around the phone. But she didn't shrink. She glanced at our children, then at me, then closed her eyes as if choosing a door she'd never dared open. "I am not a project for you to manage," Claire said, and the words sounded like they came from somewhere older than this affair. From years of swallowed resentment. "And if you speak about this in front of my children, or if you try to shame me into silence, you will not see them. That's not Ethan threatening you. That's me protecting them and protecting myself." Elaine went quiet, stunned, and then her voice turned icy, calling Claire ungrateful, dramatic, weak, and Claire's chin lifted, her eyes wet but fierce. "You don't get to call me weak anymore," she replied, "because your version of strength has always been control. And I'm done living under it." There was a long, vibrating silence on the line. Then Elaine hissed, "You will regret this." And Claire, with a calm that made my skin prickle, said, "Maybe, but it will be my regret, not yours." And she ended the call with a single tap. Then sat there trembling, staring at her own hand as if she couldn't believe she'd used it to close the door. Lily looked up and asked, "Mommy, are you mad?" And Claire swallowed, forcing a smile that wasn't fake so much as earned through effort. "No, baby," she said, voice thick. "Mommy's just learning how to be brave." Lily nodded like that made perfect sense and went back to coloring. And I felt something in my throat tighten, because I realized that no matter what happened between Claire and me, this moment, this boundary, this self-respect, was the beginning of her real freedom. The kind no affair could offer. The kind no mother could take. The investigation concluded a week later with a verdict that landed like a complicated kind of justice. Claire received a formal reprimand for violating workplace conduct, was required to complete professional ethics training, and was offered a transfer to a different department under a different reporting line. Marcus, however, was terminated for harassment and retaliation. The documentation of his threats and the security report of him waiting in the lot sealing his fate. And when Claire read the email confirming it, she didn't celebrate. She didn't cry with relief. She simply sat at the kitchen table with her hands around a mug of tea she wasn't drinking and whispered, "It's done." And I understood she wasn't talking only about his employment. She was talking about the chapter where she mistook being pursued for being loved. On the night Marcus was officially gone, the air in our house felt lighter in a way I hadn't realized was possible. As if we'd been living under a low, constant hum of threat and only now noticed the silence after it stopped. Claire asked me, later, in a voice so careful it broke my heart, "Do you hate me?" And I looked at her, really looked at the woman who had been both my partner and my pain, and I told her the truth I could live with. "I hate what happened," I said. "I hate the lies. I hate that you risked our family. But I don't want to hate you. And I don't think hate will help the kids. Or you. Or me." Claire's eyes filled, and she nodded like she was receiving a sentence and also a gift. We went to therapy. Not the movie version where one session fixes everything. Not the dramatic version where secrets explode and everyone storms out. But the slow, unglamorous version where you sit in a calm room with a stranger who holds a box of tissues like an offering and you talk about things you've avoided naming because naming makes them real. Claire spoke about Elaine, about growing up performing for approval, about learning to equate attention with worth, about how motherhood had made her feel invisible and guilty at the same time. As if she wasn't allowed to want anything for herself. And I spoke about my fear of chaos. About my father's silence and my mother's rage. About how I had mistaken keeping the peace for keeping love alive. About how I'd watched Claire drift and told myself it was normal. Because admitting it wasn't would have meant work I didn't know how to do. The therapist didn't excuse Claire. Didn't blame me. Didn't turn it into a morality play. She asked questions that forced responsibility without humiliation. And slowly, painfully, Claire began to separate shame from accountability. Began to understand that dignity wasn't pretending she hadn't fallen. It was standing up without dragging others down. Some nights, after therapy, Claire would sit on the floor of Lily's room while Lily slept, watching her chest rise and fall, tears sliding down her face in the dark, and I would find her there and sit in the doorway quietly, not intruding, just bearing witness, and Claire would whisper, "I could have destroyed her." And I would answer, "But you didn't, and you won't." The question of our marriage didn't resolve in a single epiphany, it unfolded in choices. In small acts. In boundaries kept. In honesty practiced until it stopped feeling like a punishment and started feeling like air. Claire offered me access to everything: phone, email, schedules. Not as a performance of transparency but as a way of rebuilding trust with actions. I didn't become a policeman. Because I refused to turn my love into surveillance. But I accepted the gesture as what it was. An acknowledgement that my safety mattered too. We made rules for hard conversations. No fighting in front of the kids. No weaponizing the past. No hiding behind "I'm fine" when we weren't. And we slipped sometimes. Because we were human. But we returned to the rules like returning to a trail after getting lost. Claire took the transfer. Started in a new department. And for the first time in years she stopped trying to prove she deserved her own space. She went to work. Did her job. Came home. And when she felt loneliness or restlessness, she said it out loud instead of searching for a secret door. She joined a small writing class on Tuesday evenings. Something she'd always wanted and always postponed. And the first night she went, she stood in the hallway with her coat on and her hand on the doorknob. eyes flicking to me with fear that I'd resent her for having a life outside motherhood. And I surprised both of us by saying, "Go. I'll do bedtime. You don't have to earn permission to exist." Claire's eyes shimmered, and she left. And when she came back later, cheeks flushed from cold and laughter, she looked lighter in a way that had nothing to do with being wanted by a man and everything to do with wanting herself. Elaine tried, at first, to regain control with apologies that weren't apologies, with gifts that felt like bribes, with comments about how families shouldn't air dirty laundry. But Claire held the line. Visits became conditional, supervised, limited, and when Elaine slipped into cruelty, Claire ended the visit calmly. Not with tears, not with pleading, just with the quiet authority of a mother protecting her children's emotional weather. Over time, Elaine learned, grudgingly, that access to grandchildren required respect for their parents. And while she never became warm in the way Claire had once hoped, she became careful, which was still a kind of victory, because it meant Claire had taken her power back. The true ending, the one people always want packaged neatly, is not that everything went back to how it was, because that would have been a lie. The ending was that we became something else. Something less shiny and more real. 6 months after the HR investigation, on a rainy Sunday afternoon when the kids were at a friend's house and the house smelled like wet pavement and tomato soup, Claire sat across from me at the kitchen table with a notebook open. Not for work, not for therapy homework, just blank pages. And she said, voice steady, "I need to know if you're staying because you love me or because you're afraid to leave." The question was so direct it stole my breath. And I realized she wasn't asking to be rescued anymore. She was asking for a truth she could respect. I stared at her hands, those hands that had betrayed and also held our children. Those hands that had typed a message ending an affair and then typed lines of a story for a writing class, and I answered slowly. I stayed at first because I was afraid. I admitted, afraid of breaking the kids' world, afraid of failing, afraid of being alone. But I'm still here now because there's still something in me that believes we can build a marriage we don't have to escape from. Claire nodded, tears pooling but not falling. And she whispered, "I want that too." And then she added, and this was the part that mattered most, "But if you ever decide you can't, I won't beg, I won't degrade myself. I'll hurt, but I'll keep my dignity. I'll be a good mother. And I'll build a life I'm proud of." Hearing her say that, I felt a strange, fierce relief, because it meant she was no longer clinging to me as proof of her worth, she was choosing herself. And paradoxically, that made choosing her feel possible. I reached across the table and took her hand. Not like ownership, not like forgiveness stamped on paper, but like a beginning offered carefully. "Then let's keep building," I said on the first anniversary of the day I saw the message on her phone. We did something ordinary on purpose. We took the kids to the aquarium. Watched Noah press his face to the glass in awe. Watched Lily squeal at the jellyfish like they were magic. Ate overpriced snacks. Laughed when Noah insisted a sea turtle looked like a grandpa in pajamas, and later, back home, after bedtime stories and teeth brushing and the soft ritual of turning off lights, Claire and I stood in the hallway outside the kids' rooms, listening to them settle, and Claire leaned her head on my shoulder. "I used to think happiness was something someone gave me," she whispered, and her voice was quiet in the dark, like a prize for being good. And then I chased it like a drug, and I almost destroyed everything. I turned slightly, feeling her warmth, and she continued, now it feels like something I build. Sometimes slowly, sometimes imperfectly, but it's mine. I didn't reply with grand declarations because we had learned that big words didn't hold as well as small, repeated actions. Instead, I kissed her temple and said, I'm proud of you, and she exhaled. A sound like a door opening. We didn't erase the past, we folded it into our story like a scar that proves you survived. Claire kept her job, in a healthier department, with clearer boundaries. Marcus became a warning, a lesson, a closed chapter with consequences. Elaine became background noise rather than a conductor. And Claire, most importantly, stopped auditioning for love, stopped trading her peace for attention, stopped letting fear run her decisions. Whether someone listening to our story would call it reconciliation or reinvention didn't matter to me. What mattered was that in the end, the woman at the center of it stood taller than she began. Not because she was untouched by mistakes, but because she chose to face them without losing her self-respect. On quiet nights now, when the house settled into that familiar hum and Claire would sit on the couch with her notebook, writing lines that sounded like freedom, I would look at her and feel something like gratitude wrapped around the remnants of pain. Because we had chosen silence when chaos would have burned our children. And then, when silence could no longer protect us, we chose truth with discipline. And that combination, restraint and courage, became the bridge back to a life that wasn't perfect but was honest. And in that honesty there was a kind of happy ending that didn't insult reality. A family still standing. A woman with her dignity intact. And a love rebuilt not on illusion, but on the daily decision to see each other fully and stay. That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed it, please leave a comment with your thoughts, like the video, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you.